Hello, everyone. We are back. It is Think and Link. It is a Thursday, and we have two amazing guests who have shown up for us just in time for a great discussion. We have Rebecca and Kevin, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves after a bit on capsules, so you know who hosts this and why we do this crazy thing every Thursday. And if you followed along in the history of and why we put this together, we're looking for moments of inspiration, things we can share with our community, tell stories of marketers and designers and brand builders out there in the world, and for that matter, entrepreneurs, which is going to be a big part of this conversation today for sure. Capsule is a special projects firm here in Minneapolis with a global reach and a really, really small, agile team that enjoys some amazing clients that we've worked with over the years, like Patagonia and Arc'teryx and Hydro Flask. And way back when, Kevin Hartley was a client of mine, one of my first. So I have strong and amazing admiration for him. And then Rebecca is new to our world, but absolutely amazing by what she's done, if you look at her background and her LinkedIn. So, but that's enough of the preamble. I'm going to hand it over to Kelly first, my co-host, my amazing co-host, and she'll do her introduction. Take it away, Kelly.
Aaron. Yes, thank you very much. And welcome, Rebecca and Kevin. So excited to have you here with us today. Thank you for taking some time out of your morning. I know we've had a few pre-conversations, which I'm very excited about the topics we're going to cover today. But before we dive in, would love for both of you to give a quick background, a little bit about your experience and what brought you here today. And Rebecca, let's start with you, and then Kevin, we'll turn it over to you.
Happy to. I'm glad I don't have to follow Kevin, actually. So thank you for going to me first. My name is Rebecca Messina. And my quick background is I grew up in a really small town in Western New York. I had this little idea that I didn't know what I was going to be in this world, but maybe I could be a global citizen. What could enable me to live and work around the world? So naively, about to graduate college, Miami of Ohio, I decide, well, what's the most global company in the world in 1994? The Coca-Cola company. So I naively kind of start applying as if they take undergrads. And but lo and behold, I found my way in through somebody who's become one of my best friends as an intern in the global marketing department. And 22 years later, 4 continents later, I left Coke. And my last job at Coke is actually one that I think is quite fitting for this conversation today. I was fortunate to be the CMO of the Incubator. The Incubator was called Venturing and Emerging Brands. It's since evolved a little bit in the last year, but it was a magical spot in the Coca-Cola company because we got to be the department that really looked for high growth opportunities. Maybe they weren't even high growth yet. New capabilities we could bring into the company, really meeting unmet needs for consumers and partnering with founders in so doing. About 3 years later, I left Coke and was the global chief marketing officer at a spirits company, Beam Suntory, which had these big brands, but also had these craft brands, but it also had many founders involved. And I was fortunate to have some of the family members and founders working directly on my team. And I'm really grateful to those VEB founder roots. Then about 3 years after that, I went to Uber and I was the global chief marketing officer there, where a lot of what I learned was turned upside down and a lot of what I learned was underscored. And since leaving Uber, I'm now a senior advisor with McKinsey. I have a private advising practice and I sit on 8 boards across CPG, retail, and tech. So good to be here today and really honored to be here with Kevin.
So varied, such a varied background, Rebecca. Thanks for sharing. Yes. Sure. Kevin.
Geez, Louise, that's rocking.
They haven't heard you yet.
Kelly, can you see me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yep. Great. So welcome everyone, and I'm thrilled to be here. I first heard the term triple bottom line in 1994, I think, I didn't coin the term, but I've been obsessed with it ever since, which is basically organizations that have a bottom line for financial results, but they also have a bottom line for people and planet, ergo the phrase. My view of the market economy or capitalism, unlike a bunch of my peers, is that I don't think the system is inherently evil. I think it's optimizing the creation of financial capital at the expense of the other two. And my life is dedicated to trying to fix that with brands and companies. What I mean is all systems optimize, and there's only 3 capital inputs into the thing we call market economy: human capital, environmental capital, and financial. Those are the only 3 inputs. all systems optimized. The way we run our market economy is it optimizes financial capital creation at the expense of the other two. And what excites me is being in the totally messy middle of launching brands and companies that have the triple bottom line values and win in the marketplace. Because if I launch something and only my mother buys it, God bless her, but we don't create any change. So we have to take these triple bottom line values into the world of cutthroat, big brand, big corporate competition and win. A couple of interesting things, triple bottom line things in my background. We launched that when Aaron and I met, we launched the first deregulated green electricity brand in the United States. And we launched them with Know Your Power festivals headlined by James Taylor and Sean Colvin and Kenny Loggins. And 60,000 people would show up and they would say, go sign up for Kevin's electricity brand. And we not only were the #1 deregulated brand when California deregged in '97, but we totally won the deregulation game. So exciting. We did electricity from coal and nuke, no coal, no nuke, no kidding. So only solar, wind, hydro. And British Petroleum became enamored with it and bought it for $100 million from us in 1990, in 2000 as part of their Beyond Petroleum strategy. Then I spent a long time after Bob Stiller sold Easy Wider rolling papers and started Green Mountain Coffee. And I'm sure everyone on the phone knows what Easy Wider rolling papers are for. And they're called Easy Wider so his wife's boyfriend at the time could fit in great big huge red Hawaiian buds. The other papers were too narrow. So I started in the Green Mountain Coffee side, and we bought Keurig in '06 and got laughed out of every grocery store chain in the country. They said these K-Cups would never amount to anything. Mm-hmm. This year, the U.S. will consume 18 billion of them, billion with a B. And when Keurig was on its rocket ship ride, it was so fascinating, you guys. We had to put an $8 million K-Cup manufacturing line in North America every 10 business days for more than 4 years. And then we had, I'm sure most of you know, we had an 18, when I joined, the market cap of the two companies was 50 million. We had a 13.8, $14 billion exit a couple of years ago. And our new passion project is Cambio, which is a triple bottom line K-Cup brand. And unbelievable taste, 20% of profits back to coffee farming families and super recyclable. Interestingly, and this is my last point, the K-Cup set is the only shelf set in U.S. center store grocery that does not have a mission or values-driven offering. And Cambio precision crafted to do that. So rock on.
Rock on. Rock on.
Yes, Kevin, yes. And you know, we're going to talk more about that for sure, because we'd like to talk more around that people, planet, profit, how Cambio is underscoring that in your efforts. So look forward to that. Thanks, Kevin. We're going to jump right in because there's a lot we want to cover today. Don't know that we'll get to everything, but I would love to start with a pre-conversation we'd had around innovation. And we talked about, both of you having served in innovation and marketing roles in both large and small companies, obviously startups to the size of Coke. I want to talk about those differences. I would assume we could say, there's constraints, there's risk adverse behavior in some of the large organizations, perhaps. And can real innovation actually happen in those large organizations? Or is it really just those entrepreneurial efforts where we see true innovation come to the forefront? If we could, Rebecca, let's start with you. What differences you've seen between the smaller and the larger organizations when it comes to innovative practices?
It's such a good topic. Well, I'll throw a couple of things out there that have been on my mind about this, and certainly I lived this. I think the short answer to your question is anyone can innovate, right. But there's certain conditions that are going to make you more likely to be successful. A couple of things out of empathy for Coke for a minute. Everything in that building is a negotiation with tradition.
Right.
Everything.
Wow.
Right. And
that's interesting.
And I didn't necessarily coin that term. A really good friend of mine coined it about something else. And it really, I think, translates to innovation. Because everything is, what might this say about who we were And what might this say about who we will become? And so you're just always in this fine line of negotiating with tradition. And that's one thing. The second thing is the CPGs, and this is a thing I really missed sometimes when I'm in the smaller startups or was at Uber, they're planners. The startups and Uber, they're iterators. It's the difference between plan and iterate constantly, right? And so that's another big one. So you've got this tradition, you've got this skill that has served some very well to plan and to be thoughtful. And, and by the way, certain products require a very thoughtful approach. Unlike Uber, we can ship something and change it if it's wrong quickly. It's not that easy to pull back something that has these long long production cycles. And so you have to have a little bit of empathy for like what's going on in the category, I think, as well. Right. The other thing I would say is, I never heard the word innovation in Uber once because that's their DNA. There wasn't an innovation department. The entire company was innovating. And the last thing I'd say, and Kevin has a lot more to say on this than me, is one thing is I found interesting having seen all these vantage points, small companies, big companies, really big companies that are also older, is in a way, you think about who you're disrupting in innovation. And in many ways, I felt like some of the, particularly maybe a Coke is disrupting itself, where Uber was disrupting the outside world. Right. And so if you just think about the orientation of when you're innovating and what you're disrupting. And so sometimes as such, it became incremental inside a large CPG. You were just disrupting, you were a better version of yourself.
Interesting.
Where I think an Uber was a better world. And it was like leaving something so significantly better than it found it, disrupting a taxi industry, disrupting a lot of norms. And your CPG or your small CPGs even that are doing this one thing and disrupting are also trying to do that. The thing I go back to my original point though is it's a shame that they all can't innovate equally, because when you don't get the biggest innovation out of these big companies, I don't think you get the amount of change you could get. When they put their minds to something, they could truly change the world as well. So you can change the world from an Uber vantage point or a Coke vantage point, but it's just harder for one with that tradition to put their minds to it. So that's at least my view on it.
Oh, absolutely. And resources behind. I mean, a large organization has the resources to put behind to scale.
And a following and deeply seated in countries around the world. It could do a lot.
For sure. Thanks, Rebecca. That's great perspective. Kevin, I'm sure you have some similar but also unique perspectives on this as well.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I vehemently agree with everything she just said. A little color I could maybe add is that whether it's large corporate innovation or an entrepreneur, the thing that we share is that, and I prefer to think of it in an organization as an intrapreneur, and when you're doing your own thing, entrepreneur. The thing that the intrapreneur and entrepreneur share are a couple majors. They both need a big unmet need, a product that will make customers' stocks go up and down, and capital. After that, the similarities completely end because the source of capital for innovation are two really different cats. So when you're asking for capital for your innovative idea in a large corporation, the gatekeeper is the CFO, not venture, not private equity, not a family office, not friends and family. And large organizations are actually designed not to innovate. They're designed to take risk out and take cost out of everything they do. So you're fighting against the inherent mission of the organization. And getting a yes in a large organization requires a whole suite of tradecraft, language, tools, techniques. You can do it, but it's a very unique set of tradecraft. On the entrepreneur side, you're looking from capital from the investment markets. And all they really care about is this unmet need like really interesting? Does this guy have a product I think will fill it? Do I like the team? So even if I have to pivot, and they don't have nearly the short-term horizons that a large organization has. All they care is that you're going to build that product and fit that need so they can flip it. So the sources of capital and the gates you have to go through to get a yes to the financing are two completely different cats, and that's where most large organization innovation fails is because people don't understand that unique difference.
Interesting.
Yeah. That is phenomenal. Great answers, both of you.
I know.
You've taken away a few of my questions, but I'm going to still press further into those. But first of all, I want to also do a call out to Wayne Cullinan, because I forgot to do that in my intro, and he is amazing, and he's the reason this all came together. And he was one of my first clients with Kevin way back in the days at Yamamoto. Yeah. And anyway, make sure that we all know that he's a great one. The question this is a question I've posed to a lot of people, and it's a painful one, around, can large organizations really innovate, or do they really innovate? We see it, we talk about it, we have departments. Rebecca, you just mentioned that, fighting with tradition at Coke is a fascinating, and innovating against yourself or disrupting yourself in large. There's so many things that restrict a large organization from really innovating. And we haven't even talked about the fact that to get to scale, right? Things die before they even get to scale, which really isn't an entrepreneurial thing as much, right? Because they're like, I'm just cooking, right? I'm keeping. My question to you, Rebecca, can large organizations really innovate? And I say, like, not just iterate, but innovate, like do something that isn't an extension of something they already have, right? Is that possible?
So for sure it's possible. Is it likely? No. And I think so I think it's definitely possible. Like I said, I believe that companies like that can do anything they want if they put their mind to it. But should they, would they, could they, all of that, how likely is it? And I think, Kevin talked about some of the things inside the building, the Herculean efforts one has to go through to get a yes on things much smaller than earth-shattering innovations is incredible. So when you're doing something that's fundamentally maybe requiring a business model shift, or an entire shift in how money is made, or maybe even is loss making for a very long time, or, think about some of the really bold moves we've seen companies do. Think about CVS when it walked away from cigarettes, like all these were like massive business model shifts and things. So I think I would say that they can. The thing that I find really interesting about today's world, though, is I love the idea that maybe they can't, and if they can't, then they need to partner with those who can, and they create these incredible ecosystems. By the way, are we all looking at Kevin?
Yeah.
Kevin is gone. Kevin's gone. He just wants to mess with us.
He does. I love it.
There, he's back.
He's back. That's great.
So I think, one of the things that I think we can really do now is connect the outside world. And so if they can't innovate, and maybe they can't, maybe it's just too hard in the DNA, but if they can connect the outside world in ways that their resources and their strengths can put fuel on those that can innovate, and that was really the spirit behind, the incubator at Coke. If you can do that, then I think you can even have a multiplier effect of the change you could create. So I think it's possible, but it's unlikely, is the short answer.
Okay. That's fair.
I think there's a possibility that we might have lost our audio with Kevin.
With Kevin?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I'm not hearing him. I know. With this switch.
Maybe he could go phone. Is there a phone only route?
Perhaps.
But,
Kevin, we'll get back. We'll get you. We'll get you back.
Yeah, we'll get you back.
Unlucky audience, you get to meet from.
There, I think we have him. Kevin. And
he'll be back. Rebecca, it's your show.
Oh, no.
It's all you.
Okay, so here's a softball question, but may not be perceived as a softball question, because it's going to put you on, you're going to have to call out your favorite beverage. I know. So let's talk about Coke versus Pepsi. Just personal preference.
Am I back, you guys?
You are
back.
Okay. Perfect.
We should let Kevin weigh in on the last one around.
Let's do that. Let's go back to that. Kevin, innovation.
Yeah. So again, I think that's very insightful, Rebecca, and super helpful. I think if you look at innovation with having 3 time frames, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
A near term, like if you think of it in concentric circles, really near term innovation and further out, big organizations are actually pretty good at innovation in the very near term. The reason big organizations are so acquisitive is because they suck at long-term innovation. So what they do is they let the entrepreneurs duke it out, and then they buy the winner. So no large cereal company would have started Kashi, 7 grains on a mission, but as soon as the consumer loved it, bam, and it comes into the portfolio. Then of course the corporate antibodies start the death by 1,000 paper cuts to ruin whatever they acquire. I do think that there are some tricks in a large organization that work. One of them that I would share with you briefly. So because they're so risk averse, as an entrepreneur, you need a lot of surrogates to take risk out, because you can't prove that you're right because you're not in the market. One real way to reduce the perception of risk is what's called run the last experiment first, which means before your idea gets totally ruined, put it in a bunch, like we did a huge project called Keurig Cold, which actually, Rebecca, when Muhtar saw it 10 business days later, he bought $2 billion worth of Keurig, which was really exciting. But we ran the last experiment first, and we mocked up a Keurig Cold machine that made a perfect soda from a capsule. None of this existed. It was all made up. One of my employees sat under the table and opened cans of Coke, and we had a tape recorder that made noises, and then out the little trap door comes the Coke, and the consumer tested it and reacted. And we were able to collect data and be able to show our board, we might not ever be able to accomplish this. This is freaking cool. If we did, this is the consumer response, and this is the kind of market value we could create. And then the next piece of that, you say, and I broke the technical challenges down into 10 major ones. Why don't you give me a small amount of money and see if I can crack the first technical gateway to this monstrous idea? So running the last experiment first is really powerful in large organizations. And it means, again, before everything gets ruined and watered down and everything, show it to consumers in all its glory and let them respond.
It's a really good point. The point about watered down is awesome.
And then I wanted to share with you, consumers are so funny because literally a third of the time, we were opening cans of Coke under the table, fresh. Literally a third of the consumers said, well, this doesn't actually taste as good as a Coke, but I'm sure you guys will get that fixed.
Wow.
Well,
the vessel matters.
We're all so funny.
Very interesting.
Wow, that is so good.
Talk about innovation, Kevin. That was an interesting way to position or bring something to the forefront. In a unique
the last
way.
experiment first is actually really insightful, because I think you're right. Big companies get lost in what this could be. And I think if you go, this is what it is, and this is how the reaction it gets, it does break it down. And then I think I love the way you said, and just let me solve this problem. And then if I solve that, I'll solve the next one, and I'll solve this. And it's nice breakthrough model, if you would, of like breaking down how you get there. It's very insightful.
Yes. So Rebecca, that's interesting. So if you think about it as you're asking either the organization as an entrepreneur or the capital markets as an entrepreneur, you actually have to create an, quote, investable proposition.
Yeah.
Just telling a company, give me $1 billion to do a cold machine is not an investable proposition.
Right. The
way I articulated that you responded to that, somebody can say yes to that and go, well, let's give this wild man $1 million and see if he can do it. And what the heck do we care, But you can't. So many people in the innovation world go, oh, geez, I wish I had a, quote, seat at the table and no one will listen to me. Well, yeah, but you have never presented them with a, quote, investable proposition in your life. So they're not going to do it. So it's just, you have to be really realistic about that. Then, if I could jump in on one more really interesting point, if, God forbid, the organization actually embraces aforementioned huge innovation, the next mistake they'll make is they'll try to scale it too quickly. So what happens, you were mentioning, Rebecca, about iterations, MVP, minimum viable product, iterate. Large organizations hate iterating. They want you to do the solution, then they'll model it on their spreadsheets, and then they'll put tens of millions of dollars of new EBITDA into the plan in the next 12 months. And what you end up doing is scaling the beta. And when you scale the beta, it never works because it's too early in its life cycle. So that's the other thing, not the other thing, another major thing you have to help large organizations resist.
Sure. Interesting. Okay. Wow. There's a lot we could continue down that path for sure. A lot to uncover there. I do want to take a quick shift to talk a little bit about, this is where I'm going to bring in design. We have to mention the word design at least once in this conversation. We'd had a previous conversation, Rebecca and Kevin, around purpose-driven organizations, which, Kevin, we want to talk a little bit about Cambio and again, underscoring that triple bottom line component. But I'd be curious if you could share, and Kevin, we'll start with you if you could, in terms of articulating your organization, so Cambio, your organization's purpose and practices you're putting into place. How are you articulating that through storytelling, through human-centered design, and brand ultimately? Can you share a little bit about that? And then Rebecca, I want to topic with you.
Yeah. So the word purpose is so powerful, right?
Yeah.
It just got such energy and meaning around it. It's palpable. To me, having an organization have a purpose more than just profit is incredibly intoxicating for two reasons. One, most of employees wish they could work for an organization that did more for the world than just profit. We all get that they have to survive. No one's against that. We're in the market economy. But what you end up doing with a real purpose is you end up attracting amazing employees. Right. Amazing employees are always 10 times better than a non-amazing one, paying them the exact same.
Right.
Paying them the exact same. Interestingly, you also collect people, consumers who like brands with purpose. Not a fake purpose like you're adding on your one, blah, 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 river cleanup project or something. I mean, you're really standing for making the world a better place through the market economy. You end up with consumers who really care about that. Interesting Harvard Business Review data, new 2 weeks ago, 88% of today's American consumer is looking for brands that, quote, help them do good. We think about that as aligning purchases with values, and they're looking for that. When I first got into the workforce, no one cared. We were all eating Oreos and Cheese Whiz. You couldn't sell my kids Oreos and Cheese Whiz to their kids, right? So that's an emerging trend, and purpose is so powerful. So to answer your storytelling question, Rebecca, we at Cambio, instead of saying triple bottom line, I say we sell eco-friendly, people-powered, profit-sharing coffee pods.
Say that fast 3 times.
So that's part of our storytelling, and Cambio means change. That's why we named it that in Spanish. And so we're out to change the K-Cup world, one delicious cup at a time, in terms of really impacting 10,000 coffee farming families' lives, which means 60,000 less people a year will starve, and to prevent 40 million K-Cups a day going in a landfill.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
I'd love to pick up where
those are easy. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please go.
Oh, I was just saying, those are intoxicating things for people to embrace. And we'll get emails that are they look like we wrote them, but someone who's in that looking for brands to help me do good. Remember, there's no Raging Greenie doesn't have a Keurig. No Raging Greenie has Keurigs. These are mainstream people that look a lot about America, like America. But when you see the emails come back with, oh my God, I feel so much, I fell in love with my Keurig again. I love this dream. I feel so much better. So you're giving that emotional benefit along with an amazing cup of coffee, kind of free for the ride. We didn't make that up, right? There's lots of companies that are doing it. We're just trying to be one of the 1,000 points of light.
Love that.
I do too, and I could just pick up on where you were and just take it just another angle and just add to it, which is this conversation. I do a lot of my private advising on this topic with companies, either legacy companies trying to pivot towards a more purposeful future, or younger companies kind of trying to establish what they stand for. And I love the lens that you brought on helping people do good, because sometimes folks stop a little shy on their purpose or stop even talking about it because they think it's going to have to be too big. And I think what you said is helping folks do good can be take a little sugar out of my day, right? It can be it can be huge. And
Right.
yes, there can be life-changing things we can enable companies to enable people to do. But that's also, I think, really important, is that we allow people to iterate on doing good. And even if I sometimes work with companies to say, if this is your North Star, you can start with these smaller changes in how you articulate your purpose, because sometimes you got to live into it. Sometimes a small
Right.
brand cannot be born with this audacious purpose and be believable.
Right.
Right. So it's like, how can you also iterate into it? And so, and I wonder in a way, Kevin, like when the world had Keurig, the original, the K-Cups, there was so much new in that product, right? The ease, the variety, and the convenience. And so the product was so innovative in its moment, but then in so doing, it created something. It had a negative consequence, which is enormous amounts of waste, right? And so it's like, now you're taking that waste and you're all, but what I love is that we're bettering something that came before us, which I think is awesome. And that can just be a journey for a company, right? And you had to go outside to do it versus do it inside. And so I think there's a lot of ways in, but what I'm certain of on purpose is it breaks anytime. And any company that doubts whether they should articulate one, I always say, well, then you must not be in a very competitive environment.
Oh yeah.
That's great.
Right? It breaks any tie.
Right.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, did Kevin lose audio?
Kevin.
Technical challenge abound. Well, we can start this one off with you, Rebecca, and talk about you. I think you mentioned 8 board positions right now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Across some really, really fascinating brands, doing some impressive things. And I'm most fascinated by Outdoor Voices, only because we do a lot in fashion and outdoor. And but across all of them, I'm curious about what you're hearing sitting on those boards. What are the things, just generally aggregated, entrepreneurs are talking about, worried about, thinking about, talking about currently? Because this is a nice lens into that world. So if you don't mind.
The way I went about boards, and people always ask me, like, how do you choose? And I'm like, for me, it was really important that every board I joined was in some way advancing us, a little bit like the last conversation. Right. So one is advancing fertility access, and really widening access to options. Outdoor Voices is bringing the rookie in. It's enabling everyone to get out and be playful and do things. So every one of those, I could go on. And then some of the CPG ones are less sugar or better ways of living or drinking or eating or what have you. And but they're all struggling with growth in different ways, right? And I think a couple of them, or maybe this is a theme across all of them, there's this odd moment of man versus machine that I'm seeing, particularly with a marketing lens. Machine has enabled us to do so much that I think we're losing the man side. And so I'm kind of fascinated with the talent challenges that all the companies I'm working with have. And by the way, that's true across my McKinsey clients, my private clients. It doesn't matter, like access to unbelievable talent who can play man and machine, woman and machine, use the word, but really bringing to bear all the fruits of data and all the fruits of what we are enabled to do today and what we're enabled to measure, but yet not losing empathy, consumer centricity. And so that is a real theme, because some of these companies that are born not that long ago have never had a world without tech and data enablement. Right. And so I think there's something really beneficial to some of these companies that are just a little older that don't know all of that. And so they've got some of these more fundamentals in them. So what I'm seeing some of the founders struggle with is growth. What role to hire first? Another growth marketer, another performance marketer, or another X marketer who could be more consumer insights, or, like they're struggling with a little bit of that balance very, very often. We're struggling with the changes in data and data enablement and first party data and access. I've got some tech-driven brands, and I've got other CPGs that still have brick and mortar. And so the variance you see between the access to knowing your data is so huge. But the founders are, I see a lot of the things we've talked about. The reason I love it is so many of these founders have that DNA that we've talked about, and you just pray as a board member that you continue to fuel that in the right way, right? Yeah. That you don't make them. All the things we said can happen once you start to scale or grow. So I'm always I almost feel like myself holding this tension for them, of like who you are. And even that was very true at Uber. It was so big, but it was only 10 years old. And those original employees were longing for the world they once knew, but it was gone. Right? Yeah. They were way too big for that, but yet they wanted to see some of the inklings of that DNA. These are companies that are in a different scale, but you see even that tension start to play out. There are just some employees that are starters. They just want to be there in those early days. And as a company grows, it's not their place anymore. And I always feel really good when you hear one articulate that, because I think that's really being true to who they are. Yeah. And then on the other side, you've got some that are just balancing the growth beautifully. And so it varies. It's fun. I love the variety. I never had it. I worked for 3 companies in my whole life. All right. So to get to talk, infertility and then retail. And then, so I'm really enjoying that side of it.
Interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that is so cool. The person versus machine piece, that part of the conversation about those that come from heavily person-based and those that were born in an age of machine first or technology first, and how the two kind of intersect at different places, right? And the limited capacity of people right now that just struggling to find talent.
Yeah. And we get very excited about what we can measure. And it's one thing, I actually see this a lot. So much so that we end up fighting over the 10% that we can't measure. Yeah. And that 10% is disproportionately important, because it might be something like brand love or brand meaning, right? So those metrics and the way they show up and the way they bring value into your business are going to take longer than some of the metrics that are around today's acquisition. And so I find that like you can measure 90% of everything you do, and this 10% is where we spend our time arguing. But yet we know that with a little bit of patience, that will pay off disproportionately.
Yeah. Right. So that 10% requires a little bit of trust. It doesn't, you can't just, that's funny that you spend, when you say fighting, I interpret that as a lot of energy spent, a lot of time spent on that 10% when you don't really need to, right? You should just trust it and it'll show up.
And those companies that were born in that world where they didn't have access to all the data, they get that. So they're a little advantaged because they understand that some of these dollars will pay back today, and some of these dollars will pay back in a quarter, and some will pay back in a year. Where I think some of your younger companies, really young natives, they were born a D2C company, that payback cycles in their DNA is far more real time. And that it's just harder for them to go, if I slow down and put some money in awareness consideration, what's called top of funnel, I won't see that return right away. You won't, but you'll see it in a different way down the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Strategy. Yep.
That's wonderful. I'm wondering, Kevin, do we have your audio? Oh,
not only do we lost his visual too.
It's gone. He didn't want that question.
I think we should come up with like 3 questions where Kevin can nod. Kevin.
Exactly.
Hey.
Oh, let's see if we got it now.
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Kevin, it's not the same without you. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, but there's people in the background.
I think we're hearing our own voices in the background. That might be playing on.
Can you hear?
We can hear you though, Kevin.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
They can hear me. Yes, sir.
I think someone's LinkedIn.
Sorry.
Streaming live is playing in the background.
Yeah, turn that off. There we go. Thank you. Woo.
Kevin,
we're back. Yes. Okay, so we cannot leave this without having a conversation about your book. Your book is. Yeah, there you go. Okay, we're good. We're good. We got you. We got audio. Don't touch anything, anybody. This is like when you get something set up, you've had that where you're like, I don't know why it doesn't work, but I'm not going to touch anything.
That's right. That's right.
Just
Kevin.
No. This is so fun. Yeah, he's got such a good sense of humor that he enjoys it just as much as we do, though the technical stuff is probably painful for him.
Okay, he's back. Kevin, can you hear us?
Kevin, can you hear us?
Kevin, can you hear us?
That would be indication
Yeah,
one.
no, I'm going to say
No.
that.
That'd be a no.
All right,
Kevin?
Kevin.
I can't hear them.
Nope, we
No.
can hear you, but you can't hear us. Okay.
Come and go.
Wow. Bluetooth.
Well,
And then I actually had a question about technology. I don't even know.
Whoa.
If we can hear
Yeah,
now.
that's appropriate, right?
This
See,
is,
you
We're not
need
gonna go
man.
there.
Sometimes you need man.
But Rebecca, so we're going to, if I can, stay on this topic. You were just talking about when we think about open source data and transparency, whether it's in supply chain or, I mean, consumers are almost demanding that now. It's almost a necessity. Be transparent about your practices, about the supply chain, about ingredients. I mean, it runs the gamut. But I'm curious, when we talk about growth and momentum, which we know is on every leader's mind, and you were just alluding to the conversations you're having with your clients, for most, technology has been critical for that growth. But I'd love to hear just, again, some perspectives around those conversations you're having of where technology is showing up and optimizing and creating those efficiencies as opposed to hindrances, which, to your point, you got to couple that with the human side. You know, we're in the business of humanizing brands. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to play the two.
I think context matters. So there are certain businesses that technology, I mean, Uber is a great example. It is entirely about technological enablement. That isn't true in CPG, right? But I think what the question we have to ask ourselves is, what capabilities are going to require this business to grow? Sometimes technology is your core capability. Sometimes it's your enabling capability. And I think sometimes I've even seen companies over pivot to technology needs because it feels what they're supposed to be doing. But then what happens is they almost overbuy, overinvest, and underuse. Right. And this happens a lot. And so it's really like a roadmap of what questions are unanswered that maybe technology can help us answer, right? What connections are we not making today that technology can help us enable? What conversations, what inside the building or outside, right? Like it can enable both your employees and your teams and all that. It can also play a huge role in your measurement in so many things. But the critical question is, like, we had the president a long time ago, Coke, Don Key, used to say, we can do anything we want. We can't do everything we want.
Right.
And I think that is such a nice lens of, like, on this. You don't need to do everything. You need to understand where you can get the highest leverage through technology. And I think if you keep companies pointed towards that as like the vector, you see them set up a technology roadmap. Because then there's change enablement inside the company to use that, right? Especially if you're a company that this is a real pivot for. So it's bigger than just buy some technology and plug it in. It has to do with the entire ecosystem. But I find it's a capability, and looking at it as a capability to enable what is it the core of my business model? Then we should be customizing this, and it should be the most important thing that we do, et cetera. If it's an enabling technology, then, you know, what role does that play? I'm sure Kevin has a ton to say about that, and I hear he's back, so I'll shut up.
Yes, he's back.
Sorry. No, but Rebecca,
we're good.
That's great. Yeah, Kevin, I think we've got you. You can hear us. We can hear you. Rebecca, I had asked the question. I'd love your thoughts on this too. Is we were talking about technology and how critical is it for growth? And Rebecca's point, you identify the gaps. Don't use technology for the sake of using it. See how it can create those efficiencies and support and complement what you already have in place in terms of growth strategies. But curious about just your perspective, the role that technology has played with Cambio and how you entered the market and how that's supplementing and complementing growth strategies for you.
Yeah, sorry about that, you guys. Anyway, I don't view technology anymore as like this separate, non-integrated bucket thing.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when my contemporaries and I used to say, there is zero chance that in the business world we're going to text each other. Right? That was just what kids do and stuff, right?
Right.
So it's ubiquitously in our entire lives, everywhere in our entire lives. The way I think about technology is because we're always trying to win in the marketplace, that and the way you win in the marketplace is have a legitimate, big, unmet need and have a solution that really truly excites consumers, not that you think does. and that you have measurable, unique, you're uniquely different, better, and special than to your competitors. And I can get in a sec, sweetie. And technology sometimes plays a huge role in that. Sometimes it doesn't, right? Like you can't do another social media app and not have a technical platform. If you're selling building materials and you're innovating around roofing, there's less of a technology impact. So I just see that as part of the value proposition you're creating.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, that's
good.
Great perspective.
Good. I was just about to ask right before we had all the technical challenges, the book you've got coming out, that there's rumors of. I want to make sure we talk about that and what you're going to be adding to the conversation, because I also have a huge fascination with triple bottom line and the book and all things related. So I'm very curious what you're going to add to the conversation, what the book is going to be about, and then when I can get a signed copy.
On the latter, absolutely. On the former, it's a super cool subject area, you guys. It's called, the working title is Mind Games, and it's how a millennia of human evolution can help turn your business from average to extraordinary. And what's so super interesting is in the emerging field of neuroaesthetics, scientists are revealing that when a human being is exposed to beautiful objects, sunset, art, music, there are certain pleasure centers that light up in the brain. Mm-hmm. So, and pleasure is actually not an amorphous thing, like saying I like that or I feel this way. Emotions are actually chemical. There are three primary pleasure chemicals that the brain produces. And none of my contemporaries think about this at all in the business world, though this wouldn't seem so crazy in the design world. And in the business world, and you'll love this, the primary pleasure highway in the brain is the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, which means in business, we don't think, in business, we don't actually think of ourselves in the chemical delivery business. But we're actually competing. I'm competing against another coffee brand of who can deliver the most dopamine / pleasure signals in the brain. And what's interesting about that, if you win on that construct, we're all obsessed with somebody preferring our thing versus our competitor's thing. Preference, big word, preference. Preference is actually a chemical thing. And once you realize that you're managing dopamine delivery in your clients and customers, you have a whole new perspective. And where that all ties together in business, neuroaesthetics in business, is that it turns out when a human being and their primitive brain and ocular nerves see the more aesthetically appealing product or are exposed to the more emotionally appealing experience or service, the same pleasure centers light up in the brain as with addiction, food, sex, music, and consumers can't help themselves. So the book, Mind Games, the way you're leveraging a millennia of human evolution is that's hardwired into our primitive brain for reasons of biology, psychology, and evolution, which I won't bore you with. But we're adding remember Michael Porter's 5 forces model? We're adding the 6th, which is neuroaesthetics in business as new to the world thought in our business lives about a whole new competitive dimension you can optimize.
Wow.
Well, you just dropped in a lot of dopamine. You just kicked a lot of dopamine into my
spitting science out here. I know. This is
dude.
Some big words.
And you know what's interesting in big organizations, everybody with a design sense and who's wildly creative has been forced out 100 years ago. That's not in the way we run big companies. So in Capsule, that would be the opposite, right? Everyone has that sensitivity to it. So what I'm so excited about, I feel so passionately about being able to bring new to the world thinking that makes businesses more purposeful, more robust, and better, because I think that's the way we can impact millions of current lives of people who work and hugely impact generations. So I'll stop talking.
That's phenomenal. And when's the book coming out, Kevin? When is that book launching?
It looks like within the next couple months. We're wrapping it up. Yeah.
Great. We'll be on the lookout for it. I'd like a signed copy, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
Yeah, I have zero interest in writing a book about Kevin.
I'm glad. Not that I don't want to hear a book about Kevin, because I appreciate a book about Kevin, but what you've just articulated as a book is going to be really fascinating. It's right in the middle of the world of understanding brain science and where we're going, and behavioral economics and all these other things that are advancing human understanding of other human beings and what's going on within us. I've never heard it articulated that way, though. You're basically competing for dopamine, competing for how much dopamine you produce in another human being.
Yeah, which is factually, scientifically, that's what's going on in your customers' minds. It's an understanding, an awareness, and ergo a set of new actions.
Well, and I think you're putting science to, we know that we've been competing for feelings, right? We've been in the business of trying to emote something, right? And you can do that in many ways. And I think you are kind of taking it to another level when the way you articulated it, because there's a lot under what you said. It's, human nature, and it's how we make decisions.
Hey, Ann, where's the charger?
It's so. Oh no, is everybody okay?
You're here.
Oh.
Rebecca, continue. We're listening.
Okay.
Rebecca, great
yeah,
point.
this is live, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You know what's interesting, Rebecca, building on your point, this has been hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
And the reason I call it a 200,000-year-old secret is that's when Homo sapiens emerged on planet Earth. And what's interesting is according to science, propensity to like beautiful landscapes and ugly landscapes was equally distributed among early Homo sapien. It turns out the ones who randomly appreciated beautiful landscapes survived, and that's why they became shared by all humans. Same with facial symmetry and all kinds of things, which I won't bore you with. But interestingly, this is hiding in plain sight. What I mean by that, I guarantee Steve Jobs did not think of the mesolimbic dopamine highway, but he was obsessed with aesthetics. He was way better at delivering dopamine than his competitors were. So like you'd have to shoot him to make his computers look like a Dell, right? Yeah. He cared about what the inside looked like. Or think of John Lasseter at Pixar, or think of you guys at Capsule obsessing over a beautiful mark or design. So it's hiding in plain sight. We just haven't connected the dots that in business we're actually in the chemical delivery battle against our competitors. And there's certain, and if there's certain things you can do, like make your product way aesthetically more appealing, or the script that you're writing way more emotional, and the same pleasure centers line up as with addiction. Like, listen to this quick story. This is so fun. So what lights up the pleasure centers? Kelly, you asked about storytelling. This is super cool. So in a big piece of consumer research, I'm a total research nerd, but a big piece of consumer research, they showed the respondents a line drawing of a bird that was obviously done by a little kid. And they asked, is this beautiful? And most of the respondents said no. Then they added context. And they said to the respondents, now I want to tell you that these were the last acts. This drawing was the last act of a little girl who just died of leukemia. Now is it beautiful? Now is it beautiful? Right. What you're feeling, what everyone just felt right there is a chemical. Your brain is a chemical contributor. That's what you just felt. So it's brand new thinking. But if you think of, I like to think of it as your business, which Cambio is mine. It's a business art project. A business art project. And the way to think about your business art is unpack each element, whether that's packaging or your service experience or your financial model, and make each one of them galleryable, that they could hang in an art gallery of packaging or of customer service. And when you put that back together, you will win the dopamine delivery war.
There you go.
That is great.
And there's people in the chat. There's some folks in the chat mentioning how social media is similar. It's about, really trying to keep us engaged
Yep.
And so I think it's a well-timed book, that's for sure. Maybe
Absolutely.
200, how many years too late? 200 million or whatever number you said.
200,000.
200,000.
But it's coming to fruition.
Right. It's very, very interesting point. But we have been in the feelings business. And I think, sometimes in these product-centric worlds, we forget that. And yeah, products can make you feel something, but there's even a limit to that. And it's as you put more meaning into them. And I think Steve Jobs understood that.
Yeah, he did. And you can tell externally when it's working in someone's brain, because they say things like, "Wow, that's so freaking cool."
Yes.
Or if you show them your beautiful product and they yawn, then that's a chemical. That's chemical too.
Right. This brings about it brings about a whole bunch of other questions that we certainly don't have time for. But I want to bring up a couple of points that are really. There was a time when the design department was the beauty department, right? And it used to be, and there's actually someone that wrote a great book on the idea of beauty and aesthetics and the importance of it. Tied to your book would be a fascinating conversation for sure, because yes, it should be embraced, but it was always presented as in a demeaning form. Well, that's just the beauty department. They just touch things after we've done all the smart work, and now they just make it beautiful. Just make it beautiful, which is really rather sad. And I got to think you read Sapiens, the book Sapiens, because that you've got some interesting little hooks back to that book and that author and what he was writing about that are really interesting around the importance of design. And then I've run into organizations that they've done the year of design. Right, where they're like, okay, so design is big now. Apple's big, design is big. We got to talk about design. Let's have a year of design. Like a year of design, right? We're going to have a year of innovation. We're going to have a year of accounting. What? Why would you have a year of?
Wow,
it's going to end. I know. And organizations that I respect that have done that I've got. Oh, that's really sad.
It's almost like that's a company that sees it as an event, not as a discipline. Right? Or not as a core capability.
Sure. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, there's somebody in the chat is asking for you to say the name of the book again.
That's right.
The working title is Mind Games.
Mind Games.
A 200,000-year-old secret that will change your business, product, and career from average to extraordinary.
That's a really long subtext.
I'll just remember Mind Games.
Yeah, Mind Games. We got it.
Mind Games. We got that.
If that title changes, Kevin, you let us know. We'll make sure we update that so everyone's aware.
As my children say about when they're helping me with my career, they say, "Dad, I hope you never hurt your jaw muscle."
No way. I know.
I love this.
Yep.
Right. Good point.
Wow.
Thank you, Tim. That's a really good point.
Yeah. For closing in, but staying on the book theme, and I didn't prepare either of you for this question, but I'm curious because I'm sure our audience would be curious as well. What book is on your nightstand right now? What's a book you'd recommend or something that has some meaning that you'd like to share with our audience today? Rebecca.
I admittedly read about a book a year. I'm terrible. Okay. I read the news like a crazy lady, but I read about a book a year. But I am reading this book right now that happened to be next to me.
Okay.
And it's awesome. It's In the Name of Identity, Violence and the Need to Belong. And I actually started this before the war. So this was I started this in January. And but now as I'm reading, I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm fascinated with multiculturals. My husband's Dutch. We spend a lot of time doing things outside of the U.S. And so I'm just fascinated by how people come together and how their sense of self and all that. So, and identity is a big topic in our household. And anyway, In the Name of Identity, Violence and the Need to Belong. It's really, really good because it really speaks to, and this in a way is a war of identity. And so I didn't think it was going to be this timely, but it's very timely. It's not huge, as you can see. So for anyone daunted by big 400-page books, I recommend it.
That's great, Rebecca. Thank you.
Great recommendation.
And Kevin, outside of the draft of your book to come, what else do you have on your?
Yeah, right now it's my friend Chunka Moy's book about looking back on a perfect future, which is a lot of things we sort of touched on today about how if we think about the market economy correctly, there's so much money to be made from solving these intractable global problems that that we can be optimistic.
Like that. Okay.
Yeah.
One more time, the name of the book. What was that again? One more time, Kevin.
Chunka Moy, M-U-I, is the author, and I think it's something like Competing for a Perfect Future or something like that in the title. I'd have to go get it.
Okay.
We'll
Okay,
find
cool.
it.
Yeah,
We'll find it. We'll put it out there when we publish this. This has been absolutely amazing. Even with the small technical challenges we've had in the middle of it, it's still plentiful as far as the inspiration, the wonderful quotes and conversation and back and forth. Thank you both for taking the time out of your day to inspire our audience and have a conversation. Absolutely loved it. I hope we can chat again and connect again. And I hope you two get to know each other even better down the road because I think there's a lot of overlapping
Yeah,
conversations.
I need to get Kevin's autograph.
Yes.
No, Rebecca, you were awesome. I loved it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very, very much. And
Yeah.
Kelly and Aaron, thank you.
Yes, Rebecca, Kevin, thank you. What a great hour spent together. So we appreciate your time, and thank you to our audience for joining. And let's definitely reconvene at some point in the near term.
And I would give a shout out that being crass, anyone who wants to try Cambio, use capsule. So it's cambioroasters.com and use the code capsule at checkout, and I'll sell it to you. I'll sell it to you at our cost.
Wow.
Very nice. Thank you.
That is great.
Eco-friendly, people-powered, profit-sharing coffee pods, baby.
Capsule code.
You like those mouthful of a line.
Yeah, a lot of alliteration too. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.